a couple, 3 days ago, and I wasn't able to initiate the slide program on my PC, and I never could figure out what the issue was. So I appreciate the invite. This is going to be kind of old school for us that remember back in grade school when you had there was a loop of pictures and then you'd hear a ding and they'd go to the next one. Well, that's what we're going to do tonight, unfortunately. Well, David, why don't you go ahead and go to the next slide? I guess I should have bought a bell.
Hang on. There we go.
Okay. So the M&I is this little bitty yellow worm that you see up in the upper right corner. That's the whole MOPAC with the TNP all the way down to the Gulf Coast lines. But the M&I wasn't that big of a railroad. It was 146 miles. Back in the 50s, the MOP actually in their magazine had an article called not as long, but just as wide, and it was the history of the M&I, just trying to acclimate the employees to what the railroad was. So why they built the railroad? I mean, we always dive into, hey, here's the railroad and all the motive power, but you think about why did they build a railroad? Well, the lead mining began in the 1870s with ore being moved by oxen and wagon down in the lead belt, and it was all seasonal because once it would rain, it was pretty seasonal. The roads got rutted. So the two major lead companies formed a 3-foot gauge to allow for year-round shipping. And they went from Bonne Terre over to Summit, and they connected with the Iron Mountain. Then the second thing was the backers of the Illinois Southern wanted to promote routing traffic moving up from the Mid-South, east and west over St. Genevieve to Kellogg and stay out of St. Louis. Once they got into St. Louis yards, there was a 2-3 day delay trying to get cars across. So they were really promoting move over the Illinois Southern over their car ferry. And then John Walsh was the president of the Southern Indiana and the Illinois Southern, and he saw farming products coming out of Southern Missouri going to northeast markets, and then he would come back with coal in the opposite direction because Missouri had pretty poor coal mines. So he saw an east-west traffic pattern. And then the lime production around St. Genevieve saw a rise in the rail lines through St. Gen with the loads moving throughout the U.S. So the railroad was pretty unique. One of the predecessor roads, the MR&BT, was built as a 3-foot gauge, was pretty unusual for a Midwest railroad. They operated a car ferry across the Mississippi for 5 decades. They had the only switchback between the Alleghenies and the Rocky Mountains. And then pretty typical of many short lines, most of its motor power fleet was secondhand locomotives and rolling stock. They didn't buy any new power until 1925. So here's your family tree. Going up from the left to bottom, you got the St. Louis and Deloge Railroad, then the MR&BT, and then over on the other side, you got the Centralia Western, which is made up of about 3 short lines, and then the Illinois Southern, which all became the Missouri, Illinois in 21, and then the MOP took them over in 1929. So the St. Louis and Deloge, they were built by the St. Joe Lead Company and the Deloge Lead Company. They had a joint venture late 1870s. They built a 13.3-mile narrow gauge from Bonne Terre over to Summit, which is south of Mineral Point on the Iron Mountain. And they really couldn't establish any favorable railroad rates with the Iron Mountain, so they built the MR&BT to totally bypass the Iron Mountain, came up to Riverside, and then they used a car ferry, again, to bypass the Iron Mountain to come into St. Louis and East St. Louis. And then they abandoned their 13-mile line over to Summit.
The other is the senior writer of Town Hall. He joins us tonight. William, thanks so much for coming on. So I just want to be clear, the reason that we're showing your earlier footage of other riots in D.C., these are not the first, is not to excuse any specific behavior today.
Can you mute somebody?
I'm trying to figure out who it is.
Okay.
You covered all of it. So starting with that, tell us what you saw today.
Is that it? Yep.
Yeah.
I did.
Go ahead. Next slide.
Yes, sir. So here's your line from Bonne Terre over to Summit, 13 miles. Interesting, I looked at a timetable they published in the official guide. It took them an hour and 15 minutes to go 13 miles. I think they probably could have walked faster than that. Go ahead, David. So here's my little narrow gauge locomotives. They're switching the St. Joe Lead Company. On the original picture, you can see the smaller cars on the flat car, which is pretty interesting, but it's 3-foot gauge locomotive at St. Joe Lead. Okay, then they built the MR&BT. 1891, the mainline track was 32.5 miles. They had 2 miles of siding. It was 3-foot gauge, 56-pound rail. They had 7 locomotives, 2 freight cars, 10 freight 2 passenger cars, 10 freight cars, 2 cabooses. By 1907, they had standard gauged. The railroad grew up to 95, basically 96 miles. It was 56 and 75-pound rail. This time they had 19 locomotives, 6 passenger cars, 4 mail and express, 110 box cars, 758 dumps, which talks about the iron ore that they were shipping out of there, 32 coal, and then their maintenance away was 12. Go ahead, David. So the MRBT, they were started in November of 1893. The 46.5 narrow gauge road was converted to standard gauge. That meant they could now interchange carload and LCL business with their connecting roads, which mostly was the Iron Mountain. That gave them access in the Union Station. They had trackage rights 27 miles over the Iron Mountain, which meant they didn't have to change trains at Riverside. But interesting, being built as narrow gauge, 40% of their main line was curved, and one branch was 67% curved, which meant their standard gauge steam engines had to have blind center drivers. Here's a picture of number 6 on dual gauge trackage at Riverside. The Riverside was owned jointly by the MR&BT and the Iron Mountain 50-50. So here's the MR&BT yards. The coaling station is off to the left. You can see the incline going up to the coal dump. The shops are over on the right. This is all taken about World War I. Over to the extreme left, you can see a couple little buildings and some cars sitting over there. That is St. Joe Lead, which they served. And then you can see the design of the cars sitting in the yard here for the quick dump of the iron ore to get that lead out of there. But anyway, this is a pretty typical gondola that they had for years. Go ahead, David. So one of the predecessor roads was the Centralia Chester. They went from Salem down to across the river and over to St. Genevieve. The main line was 61.5 miles. Gauge was 4'8" and a half. They had 56-pound rail. And their rolling stock was they had 5 locomotives, 2 passenger cars, 2 baggage, 1 box car, 1 flat, and 43 coal cars. They did have a couple mines over on the Centralia and Chester, which tells you why they had so many coal cars. Go ahead. Here's a couple of shots of the early motive power. When I was first starting off the book, I had, there was a guy by the name of John Allen who lived down in southern Illinois, and John passed away, and Ray Curl had acquired his collection. And I bought, I kept John's collection intact, so I had about 80 pictures of MR&BT and Iron Mountain, or not Iron Mountain, but M&I locomotives and passenger cars and stations. And I thought, well, I got enough here for a book. And Dennis Faircloth put me in touch with Linda Marlar's widow, Betty, who lives down in Bonne Terre. And I called Betty up one day and I told her I was writing a book. And she said, well, you're welcome to use Lyndall's pictures. He had passed away from cancer, but they can't leave the house. And so I drove down with a laptop and a scanner, and he had 6 volumes of pictures and documents, and each 3-ring binder was probably about 4 inches thick. And I spent a solid week from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock scanning all of his documents and all of his pictures, and that was really the nucleus of the book. Go ahead. So the Centralia Chester was incorporated in Illinois on December 7th, 1883. They went into receivership 7 years later, and they'd only laid rail in 5 Illinois counties. So being in receivership, they were sold by foreclosure. Walsh bought them, who was the president of the Southern Indiana Railroad. And like I mentioned earlier, he wanted to move or extend his railroad from Terre Haute, Indiana, to the Mississippi River, where he'd have a connection with the southern roads. So then he incorporated the railroad as the Illinois Southern in 1900. Go ahead. So the Illinois Southern basically was a nucleus, part of the M&I. I mean, a great part of the M&I. They went from Salem all the way down to Bismarck, Missouri. They were 136 miles long, 4 foot 8.5. They went from 65 to 90-pound rail. But the construction road in Missouri was called the Missouri Southern. And the reason the railroads did this, as you guys probably know, is if the construction road went belly up, it didn't take the main road with them. So there was a lot of construction roads back in the turn of the century just to protect financially the major railroad. Go ahead, David. So here's a bridge over Rough Creek that's under construction. This was the largest bridge on the railroad, by the way. Go ahead. So rather than building the bridge across the Mississippi, the Illinois Southern used car ferries and rail barges to cross the Mississippi from Kellogg over to Thamira. And like I mentioned earlier, this is to bypass the St. Louis Gateway. So you can see Thamira down here is in the lower bottom part of the picture, and then Kellogg is up in the top portion. The ferry would go downstream and then use the paddle wheels to come back up and push against the incline is how they made their move. Go ahead. So here's a shot of Thamira. You can see the car ferry in the background. This is about mid-20s. You can see the car ferry in the background. The tower is to protect the Frisco. So the Frisco is crossing the 2 incline tracks going down to the car ferry. Over to the right is a small M&I yard. But this is basically what the Thamira looked like back in 25. I thought this was a great shot. This is a double-page spread in the book. Okay, their first boat. This was just basically a barge that pushed a ferry that pushed a barge across. A single track barge across the Mississippi, held 3 rail cars. And I was able to find this at the University of Wisconsin. They were great to work with. They had pictures of a number of the early steamboat operations that the Illinois Southern operated. The Nick Sawyer was built down in Chester, Illinois, by the way, which I thought was pretty interesting. Here's the second car ferry they had. It was wooden hulled. It's called the St. Genevieve. It was built in 1902. You can see a passenger car on the deck, and then I think there's a gondola sitting next to it. But David, here's a picture of it trapped in the ice. This happened a couple times with the car ferry. Doing some research, the boat was painted black with white lettering, which I thought, why would you operate a boat that was painted black on the Mississippi? But anyway, that was what the newspaper article came about. 2 gondolas up on the deck are lettered Illinois Southern, and then the guy standing in the front here, I found out, and it's a caption in the book, was a car inspector off the Illinois Southern. Okay, on March 18th, 1918, they were docking at Kellogg and they hit the pilings in such force that the hull was split open and it sank with a full load of rail cars on it. And this basically put them in receivership. Go ahead, David. So here's some pictures from Marlar's collection I thought were pretty cool. This is the salvage crew on the deck of the car ferry trying to save some gondolas and a boxcar back in the background. It was amazing, the shots that he had with derailments, just unusual stuff. I was really impressed with not only what pictures he had, and this is way before the internet because he passed away about 25 years ago, but he also had all the company correspondence. So if there was a bobber caboose, for example, he had a photograph of, the second page would have what the disposition was of it. And they used a lot of the bobber cabooses as guardhouses around the mines. Go ahead, David. So here's an Illinois Southern with an incline car. So the idler cars were to keep the weight of the locomotive off the car ferry. So this is a pretty unusual design. What we think they did is just took a flat car and put the cabin on top of it for the crew. But actually went down to St. Genevieve and interviewed a guy that was a deckhand on the car ferry and gave me a lot of information about how they switched the empties and loads on and off the boat. And that incorporated that into the chapter on the car ferry. Go ahead. Here's a builder's photo of Illinois Southern 501. They didn't have a lot of big motive power. And again, if you blow that up, the driver, I can't tell here, but the drivers are blind. No, that's Illinois Southern. The drivers weren't blind on these. They were blind on the MR&BT. Go ahead, David. So here's the modern boat. The second St. Genevieve, after the first one sank, the Illinois Southern was already looking at replacing it because the carloads had gotten heavier. They had a lot more of them, and so they'd already decided they were going to buy a steel-hulled boat. And so this was the second St. Genevieve. It lasted all the way up into 1961. It was put in service in 1922, and this is an extremely early shot because you can see the guns on their MR&BT. Go ahead, David. Here they are docking at one of the inclines. And again, talking to the gentleman I interviewed down at St. Genevieve, he gave me a lot of information about how they locked the incline and the car ferry together once they made connection. Um, and I think I've got those pictures later in the presentation. If not, they're in the book. Go ahead. So here they are docking at Kellogg. So you've got a steam locomotive way up in the top of the picture with the idler car, and they're just waiting for the car ferry to dock. They're gonna bump up against those pilings and then connect with the incline you see coming down to the river. The incline actually rode on tracks, railroad tracks, just like the upper deck did. Go ahead. So this is the locking device. They called it the bull moose. He explained why, but if you can see that pin that's by his right leg there, that's how once these two pieces connected, they would drop that down and lock everything in place. These photographs were taken by a post-dispatch photographer. He rode the car ferry. I don't remember what date it was, but anyway, we were able to, David was pretty instrumental in us buying Joe Colias's negative collection. And in there were a number of shots that I'm looking for his picture, or his, Wayne Lehman. So Wayne Lehman was a post-dispatch photographer and rode the car ferry. And Joe had his negatives that he had taken when he rode the car ferry. So we were able to get a lot of those and reproduce them in the book. Go ahead. Here's a little 080 with the later idler car waiting for the car ferry to show up. This would be on the Thamir side. Go ahead. So here's number 24 pulling a cut off the ferry, and the signal that you see behind the stack between all the smoke is to protect them with the Frisco at Thamir. Go ahead. So here's a shot from the idler car looking down the incline to the deck. It's interesting, you can see one of the Alco RS3s on the deck, so they must have been moving it back and forth between the shops at Bonne Terre back to its assignment over on the Illinois side. Okay, here's another shot of the incline, and like I mentioned, you can see it rides on rails down into the river. This is the dike walls. This is what they call the boat yard behind the dike. And then these are the dike walls. So I guess if the river ever flooded, they could put dirt in here, close this off, and keep the flooding from coming on the other side. So when the Illinois Southern was acquired by the M&I, it was in rundown condition. At foreclosure proceedings, one of the bondholders had bid scrap value for the railroad at $725,000, and he was going to dismantle the property. Obviously, the larger shippers on the road, the ore companies, the lime companies, lead companies, were dependent on rail transportation. They organized the M&I, paid $900,000 for the property, and they agreed to operate it for at least 10 years. And then the M&I was incorporated under the general laws of Missouri, January 8th, 1921. And in 1929, the Missouri Pacific acquired controlling interest of the M&I. So here's what the M&I looked like in 1929. So up from the upper right, you got Salem, Illinois, runs down through Nashville, Sparta, which was their main shops. They had a little branch line over to a couple mines. They ran down to Chester, across the river, obviously, with the car ferry, and then they ran over to Bismarck, and then your north-south line and all your little spurs over there, farmer MR and BT trackage. So that's what the M&I looked like in 29. So industries on the M&I, which is the reason why we got railroads. The railroads served the largest lead deposits in the world. They had a large limestone operation around St. Genevieve. And then they had a lot of smaller industries in Missouri. They were shipping ties, poles, and mining props. But basically, the Missouri was pretty hilly, a lot of older farms. On the Illinois side, they had several small grain elevators and mills. They had 3 coal mines, and then later they had a coal river transfer at Kellogg. They had a lot of rail business at Centralia, Sparta, and Salem, and then they had a large oil field around Salem that was developed in the late 30s. So they discovered oil in 37 at Selmaville, which is south of Salem. By 1939, 93 million barrels of oil were being pumped from Marion County. And these are some of the shots when I bought that collection of John Allen. His brother was actually a switchman for the M&I, and these were shots, I think, either taken by him or he was in them. But this shows the storage tanks in the background and the loading platforms at Selmaville. Here's one of the mines. I got this from one of the historical societies over in Illinois that I contacted when I was working on the book, Perkle Mine over in 1937. Here's a shot of Mississippi Lime at St. Genevieve before they modernized all the facilities over there. This would have been taken out of one of the cabooses. Here's St. Joe Lead smelter. I don't talk that fast. There we go. That's the Mississippi River in the background, that gray band that you see. But you don't realize how big these facilities were. And you go down there today, and of course the EPA has closed down all this stuff. There's nothing in Herculaneum today that all this is gone. Here's one of the Chat Hills down at St. Francis Smelter. Thought it was interesting that seeing eye gondola, truss rod gondola sitting in the foreground. This is the present location of the Missouri Mining Museum down at Park Hills. So this is St. Joe Lead at Bonne Terre. But if you go down there, a lot of these buildings are still in existence. Let me think. This is down at Leadville. I wish I would have put the caption on there. This is in the book. I had Jake Jones, who works for the Park Hills Museum, help me with a lot of these, identifying a lot of these pictures where these mines were. Lindell had on the back locations, but some of them were marked wrong, and so we were able to straighten stuff out. But this is one of the shots in the book. Here's some early boxcars on the railroad. MR and BT up in the upper left. I think this is a little 36-foot box, and then the Centralia and Chester lower right. And believe it or not, they were shipping iron ore in these cars as well as the gondolas. Go ahead. And then the M&I in, let me think, 42 bought a number of these cars. And there's a movie out on YouTube. If you do a search on lead mines in Missouri, they show these being loaded with, both being unloaded with iron ore and then being loaded with the lead pigs in the film. And if you're inclined, Atlas makes this car. They just brought it out in the last year. They make this exact car in HO scale, and they did a really nice job with it. They got all the lettering correct, so you can add this to your roster if you want. Go ahead, David. Here's their open top cars where they were hauling lead concentrate. And I thought this is pretty cool. They had their lead belt logo on the side of the one car. Go ahead. Like I mentioned earlier, here's the slope sheets on the interior so they could get this stuff unloaded pretty quick. They would just open up the sides and dump the stuff out. They didn't have a lot of passenger service on the M&I. Mostly it was a freight railroad, so they used gas electrics a lot. The trailer was used for RPO baggage service. There's some pictures in the book of the interior, both the 625 and the interiors of the trailer. This is over at Edwardsville. Not a very big water tank. I thought this was a great shot. This is a Lee Freeman again, and off to the left, I cropped it out, but there's a guy holding up a flash bulb like the old, who was a photographer that did all the N&W night scenes. Link.
Link.
Yeah. So this is this was all illuminated with flash. I thought it was a great shot. This was taken over at the Concrete Roundhouse in Sparta back in '54. This is the extreme east end of the railroad. This is Salem, and you got the gas electric sits on the right side, and you got one of their large 108, which was one of their engines they bought new in 1925. Is Clyde on? Anyway,
He's probably muted.
This is Clyde Anderson's shot. Linda and I one night went to a Ethiopian restaurant for the first time, and it just so happened that Clyde and another guy from the railroad off the Mopac were sitting at a table not too far from us. So I went over and interrupted him, and I said, "Clyde, did you ever take any pictures of the M&I?" And I think about 3 days later, he shows up with a huge envelope of slides and color negatives for me to scan, and I used a number of them in the book. It was just a great serendipity because I didn't think about even calling him and just happened to run into him at the restaurant. So, boy, thanks to Clyde, we got some great color shots in there. So Mark Bess, who used to work for the MOP, also Mark was in a Explorer troop with Rene Lavois, and they went down to St. Genevieve at one time. And Mark, thank goodness, I think he went back later on, but he shot a lot of nice color, which is in the book as well. So the ferry was taken out of service in '61, basically due to the high cost of repairs with the railroad, and they decided to use the car ferry, and then they get on the Frisco, across the Mississippi, and then they got back on the M&I. The EPA shut down the lead industry in Missouri in the '70s, and then lime production was still a strong source of revenue on the M&I. But this is over at Salem, by the way. Go ahead, David. So the M&I was merged into the MOP in November of '78 with a number of other subsidiaries, and so it ended 55 years of service under the subsidiary's name. Go ahead. So a little bit about the book. I started it back in September 2017. Like I mentioned, I had a collection of shots from the John Allen estate, but then I came across the Lyndall Marlar collection in December of 2017. 6 huge volumes of documents and photographs. I would say the shelf was probably 10 feet long. Bill Bunch, who lives in Bonne Terre, his dad was a M&I conductor. Joe Polly, who had relatives in St. Genevieve and in Gene Seaman, all sent me thumb drives of their photographs. And then, like I mentioned, David was instrumental in buying the collection, class collection, in September 2019. And it was interesting. I already had the book laid out, I already had all the pictures selected, and then we bought the collection. So I went back and redid everything because we had the original negatives, which were just a hell of a lot better images than what second generation prints were. And then Norbert Shacklet provided Steve Parsons' research on the M&I. Steve had started a history that he had written back in the 60s and 70s with a bunch of interviews. And Steve passed away in the early 70s, but had given Norbert his M&I history, and that was a lot of good information for the east side. He didn't do much on the Missouri side, but he did a lot on the east side of the river. Go ahead. So I interviewed a lot of farmer M&I employees. I'd worked down at Herculaneum and St. Genevieve a little bit, but there was a lot of guys down there that had information about the long barrel locals. Dennis Woke had a lot of photographs, excuse me, of the car ferry, timetables. I mentioned Jake Jones earlier at the Missouri Mining Museum. He helped with captions on the lead mills and the smelters. Teresa over at the MOT had a depression study done on the M&I by the MOP, which was just really neat information about what industries were around. And then there was also a 1968 study by the marketing department of the M&I. I mentioned interviewing Don Carl at St. Genevieve, who was a deckhand on the car ferry. And then, 36 different books, articles, unpublished manuscripts were used to write the book. Go ahead. So here's the chapters. I'm not going to bore you with all that. Go ahead. So here's some more images of the book. Here's St. Genevieve at the Thamur Incline in the mid-50s. By this time, they'd taken out the interlocking tower and replaced it with just a signal that you can barely see there. Go ahead, David. There's a chapter on the wrecks, which is my 3-year-old granddaughter, my wife's favorite chapters. Evansville Hill was their ruling grade. And here's a shot of a train that obviously didn't make it down the grade too well. Engine number 21's turned over while number 5 is helping with the cleanup. Here's Centralia Chester number 1. Of course, typically everybody comes out with the kids for the portrait of the engine. This is the interior of the Bonne Terre station. And there's a whole chapter in the book on employees, which normally railroad books don't cover, unfortunately, but I was able to get a lot of photographs from Lindell's collection and other guys of employees around the railroad. We got employee stories in there working for the railroad, and that's been a very popular chapter in the book. Here's the depot at Herculaneum. Interesting, the train crews stayed overnight in the second story, which I had never seen that before. I know a lot of agencies had a second story for a family, agent's family, but I never knew they had crews staying over the night. That was pretty interesting. Over on the right is one of their 060s, which were pretty top heavy. There's a picture in the accident chapter where one of these things had flipped over. Here's number 7. It was on the Leadville branch. This is at Bonne Terre, and in the background is St. Joe Lead. This is Joe Colias' picture. This is another shot where I was interviewing the Don Carl, and a lot of these guys, I didn't have their names on the car ferry, and he looked at it right away and told me who the guy was standing there in the foreground. But here's Ray Clare with a Alco and an Idler car coming down the incline at Thimere. Again, this is a Wayne Lehman shot, which is just great. Here's one of their 280s that they purchased in 25 on a freight. This is the Colias picture. So 625 broke down. The mop was switching the interchange over at Flinton, Illinois, and the M&I got a hold of them, and they actually completed the passenger run for the M&I. So here's their first diesel. NW2 was delivered in 49, and they assigned it to switching. This is their only EMD switcher they had. Everything else they flipped over and bought one RS2, and the rest of them are RS3s. Here's their RS3s down at Bonne Terre. Here's the M&I local switching over at Bismarck. And I thought it was interesting as they turned the Illinois Southern depot into the freight house, and then they used the Mopac station at Bismarck for any passenger service. But here they are switching out some Eagle merchandise cars. This is Central Yard in 1955. Can't see it, but the track to the extreme left was their scale track. Anyway, Dennis Faircloth, who was a dispatcher on the MOP and then later on the UP, hired out with the M&I, believe it or not, when he was about 15 years old. And they wouldn't let him answer the phone because he was a kid, but he was able to identify a lot of these pictures for me and even name the individual tracks, which I've got in the book as well. So M&I train number 95 was going southbound on a local on Sunday, June 30th at 4:35 a.m. and they came to this washout. The washout was 65 feet long and 12 feet deep, and it was caused by 7 inches of rain that put Big River out of its banks. And one of the guys that was working this, they said they would hear a creak and everybody would just creak and just start running in every direction because they didn't know which way the track was going to go. Here's the picture taken by Lindell from the Thimere Roundhouse in '71. You know, he was great not only collecting stuff, he would take a lot of photographs of the present operations when he was working as the diesel supervisor. So this is over another one in the rec chapter. A kid over at Bonne Terre had thrown a switch into a spur going into a mill track, and ice had built around the brake shoes on the Jeep that you see there, and they couldn't get it shut down fast enough. So you can see what happened to the caboose. They actually ran into the house and knocked the house off the foundation, but nobody was hurt. And here's a color shot that's in the book, switching the power plant. And I'm trying to think, over at Salem. Yeah. Rail to water train going to Chicago. This is a Mark Best picture taken at Nashville in '82. One of the few Mopac bay window cabooses, long bay window cabooses. And even though the M&I had gone away, I think several years earlier, here's a former T&P caboose on the M&I local, and you can see where the crew is chalked in under the number M&I just to reclaim their railroad. And taking a nap in a Jeep 9. I think this is the last slide. So, any questions?
You might have to unmute yourself.
I'll have one. Charlie, if the switching for loading the ferries, was that primarily to keep the vessel in trim and level? You know.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they'd put the loads on the center track and they'd put the empties on the two outside tracks. If they had too many loads, they would just cut back on how many cars they put on there.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say, Charlie, that I got the book through David's urging, and even though I'm not a Missouri native, I was thoroughly impressed with reading about. Especially, I'm with your wife and your grandkid about the Rex chapter, because that was pretty impressive with some of those pictures you had in there. But overall, it's a great history of the M&I. And if somebody doesn't have the book, I suggest they get it.
Yeah, you know what? I was amazed for a 146-mile railroad how much material that I was able to come up with. So we printed 650 books because, you know, in today's day and age, you really don't know what the, you know, how many books you're going to print. So we printed 650 back in September, and I think we're down to less than 100 today. So if there's any interest in buying the book, I wouldn't wait too long.
Charlie, when did they move the dispatching to Chester?
I have no idea. You'd have to ask probably Mr.
Bennett?
Faircloth. Yeah.
Charlie, why don't you tell us how to get the book, and the way Bill will have it in a minute, so we put in the newsletter.
Yeah, I'll have David put that in the minutes.
Okay.
If you just go to mopac.org, we've got it out on the company store.
There was a link in the email I sent out with the link for the Zoom meeting also, but it's on mopac.org.
Okay.
There's almost 700 photographs in the book, and there's about 370 pages. So people I've known that have bought one, I've asked them if they've read it, and then all I get back is no, but I've looked at the pictures, which I think is pretty typical.
Yep,
I don't know why I write books. I should. What's that?
Well, I think I've read most of the book, Charlie.
Well, good. I've read it 5 times.
I hope so. Anybody else get anything?
I just, this is Clyde, add that he mentioned Mark Bess, and that was part of the Railroad Occupations Explorer post that Missouri Pacific sponsored. And there were several NRHS members, including Mark Bess, that were members of that post. And Russ Osman originated it, and then I inherited it after the first year. And so some of you may have been involved in some of our activities back in the late 70s.
Yep.
I think we just need a program some night on the Explorers post, and you guys can tell some stories.
Oh, we've got them.
I know you do.
A little off topic, but what is Mark Bess up to nowadays?
I think he's resting after getting the PTC going. because he was on that team at Union Pacific getting the positive train control system going.
Renee, is that the guy you were telling me about last week in Utah?
Yeah, Mark Best. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Clyde.
Yeah, he retired.
Clyde,
He
do you
retired
remember
and moved
these?
to Utah.
Oh yeah, the Explorer Post made those Missouri Pacific plaques cast out of plaster.
Yeah, we be in your basement painting them and casting them. I still got mine.
Bill, you got yours?
I don't think this is Rich. Oh, maybe I'm finally getting through. The Leadwood switchback, anything in the book on that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a bit on it.
Okay, thank you. And David, any mention, when will I believe there's a joint MOPAC Burlington meeting coming up in the summer or something?
That'll be in October. October 7th through 10th, I believe, are the dates. Joint with the Burlington route at St. Louis Union Station. We just had a 3-hour Zoom meeting on it last night, actually.
Yep.
Renee was on there. So hopefully, all things permitting, we're allowed to do it and we can go forward with it.
What dates were those, David?
October 7th through 10th.
Yep.
You have a state constitution that has been interpreted.
And we're hoping to do a train ride at Union Station if they have equipment to do it. Apparently they're getting rid of all their coaches and getting new coaches, so that's up in the air.
Also need a power car.
So that's the
And a
second one.
power car. Yeah.
Anybody else got anything?
Something not related to railroading, but Biden might not be president 46. He might be number 47.
Well,
Depends
we'll
on
stay off of
25th
that. I think.
Amendment and all that junk.
All righty, guys. Thank you, Charlie, for putting that together.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Yeah.
Excellent presentation.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank
See
you,
you
Charlie.
soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Hey,
Good night, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
all right.
All right.
Night.